The courtroom smelled like floor polish and old paper. I remember that more than anything else, not the fear, the polish. My husband stood at the witness rail in a gray suit I had paid for. He had practiced this. You could hear the practice in it. Every word came out smooth and sad, the way a man sounds when he has rehearsed his own grief in a mirror. "Look at her record, Your Honor," Nathan said. "The deployments, the absences. She chose the ship every single time." He let his voice drop, the way he always did, before the part he wanted you to remember. "She's nothing without me. She never built a thing on her own." In the second row, his mother nodded. Brenda had a tissue ready. She always had a tissue ready. She dabbed at one eye, then the other, in case the judge was looking at the wrong side of her face. The woman at the rail behind Nathan looked at her nails. Renee, 33 years old. She had answered my front door 2 weeks earlier, holding a coffee mug that used to be mine. I sat at the empty respondents' table. No lawyer beside me yet. A jet-lagged woman in borrowed calm, hands folded, spine straight, the way 20 years teaches you to sit when the room has already decided you are guilty. Judge Emmett Boyd looked up from the file. He was a heavy-set man with reading glasses pushed down his nose and gray in his hair. He asked the question in a tired, even voice. "Is anyone appearing on behalf of the respondent?" The double doors at the back of the courtroom stayed shut, but the bailiff standing beside them did not stay still. Deputy Rowe had one hand resting on the door. I watched his head turn toward the hallway. I watched him go rigid. He lifted his radio to his mouth and said one word into it that I could not hear. Nathan kept talking. He did not see the door. He did not see the bailiff. He was still looking at the judge, still building the sad, smooth story of a woman who was nothing. I had spent 20 years learning to stand still while things exploded around me. Fires, floods, men who outranked me and were wrong. I had learned to keep my hands steady and my voice level and my face closed while the world came apart. I was about to do it one last time, but let me back up a little. 7.5 months. That was the length of the deployment. 211 calls I could count on my own phone, most of them never connecting. And a voicemail that lasted 9 seconds? I heard the voicemail on the jet bridge before I'd even cleared the terminal, with my sea bag still on my shoulder and my whole body still moving to the rhythm of a ship that was now 1,100 miles behind me. A body does not come home when the plane lands. It comes home slowly, over days, the way your ears take their time about the silence. "The kids are with me," Nathan's voice said. "Don't come to the house. My lawyer will be in touch." Then nothing. 9 seconds. He did not even sound angry. He sounded like a man reading a grocery list. I stood in the jet bridge and let the other passengers flow around me. I was a commander in the United States Navy. I was the executive officer of a guided missile destroyer. 90 minutes earlier, I had been thinking about nothing but the exact shape of my daughter's face at the arrivals rail, the gap where her front tooth used to be, the way my son plants his feet when he is trying not to cry in public because he thinks 9 is too old for it. There was no daughter at the arrivals rail. There was no son. There was a bank of empty chairs and a family reuniting 3 gates down, a young sailor lifting a toddler over his head, a woman pressed against a man in whites, and me, standing alone with a phone in my hand and a bag on my shoulder. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because people always expect the crying, and it did not come. What came was a cold, familiar quiet. The same quiet that used to settle over me when the general quarters alarm went and the smoke started coming through the ventilation, and I had to decide in about 4 seconds which order to give. Some part of me stepped forward and took the wheel. Observe. Collect. Do not detonate. I called Nathan back from the terminal. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted him 3 words. Where are they? The little bubble showed the message delivered, and then nothing came back at all. So I rented a car, because I no longer had one at the airport that was mine, and I drove to the house I had bought with 19 years of CPay. There was a sedan in the driveway I did not recognize, a small red one with a parking sticker for a law office downtown. There was a light on in the kitchen. There was a woman's coat on the hook by the door that was not mine, a long camel-colored thing, hanging exactly where my jacket used to hang. I still had my key. I got as far as putting it in the lock before the door opened from inside. Renee stood there. She was pretty in a tired way, and she held the mug like a shield, both hands wrapped around it. It was the blue one, with the chip on the handle that Milo had given me for a birthday. "Gwen," she said, "you really should talk to Nathan's attorney." Behind her, through the gap in the door, I could see my living room. There were cardboard boxes stacked against the wall, 4 of them taped shut. My son's name was written on one in black marker, Milo. My own child, packed into a box in my own house by a woman drinking from my own mug. Where are my children? I said. It did not come out as a question. It came out flat, the way you give a range and bearing. They're safe. They're with Nathan's mother tonight. She started to close the door. Please don't make a scene. There's a court order. If you force your way in, it looks bad for you, not for us. That last sentence told me a great deal. It told me she had been coached. It told me they had already spoken to a lawyer about what I would do and how to make it hurt me. I could have put my shoulder into that door. I am stronger than I look, and I was angrier than I have ever been in my entire life. Angrier than smoke, angrier than any storm I ever stood a watch through. Another voice, the one the Navy spent 20 years training, told me to stop shaking and start writing things down. So I stepped back off the porch. I took out my phone. I photographed the sedan and its plate and the law office sticker in the window. I photographed the camel coat on the hook. I photographed the boxes through the gap in the door, my son's name in black marker, before Renee got it shut. The deadbolt turned behind her, loud in the quiet street. Then I sat in a rental car outside my own home and made a list on the back of a boarding pass. Everything I knew, everything I did not, everything I would need. Bank, orders, medical, lawyer. The word children, underlined twice. The house still smelled like my children when the door was open. Crayons and laundry soap and the particular smell of a home that has kids in it. It did not smell like mine anymore. It smelled like a place I used to live. I drove to a motel by the interstate and I did not sleep. And at 0300 my body woke me the way it always does, out of habit, ready to relieve the watch. There was no watch to relieve. There was only a ceiling and a list and a very long night. Around 4, I called my sister. Robin lives 2 time zones away, and she answered on the second ring, because sisters do, and I told her all of it, in a flat voice that scared her more than crying would have. Come out here, she said. Bring the kids. Get away from him. I can't take the kids, I said. That is the whole problem. He has them in a piece of paper that says he gets to keep them. There was a silence on the line. Then Robin said the thing I needed to hear, which was not comfort. You survived a fire on a ship, she said. You pulled 2 men out of a burning room. You are telling me a man in an insurance office is going to beat you. He is ahead right now, I said. Then you are behind right now, she said. You have been behind before. You know what to do when you are behind. You stop feeling and you start working. She was right, and she knew she was right, and she stayed on the phone with me until the sky outside the motel went gray, not talking much, just there. When we hung up, I got out my boarding pass and my list, and I wrote 3 words at the top of it in block letters. Work the problem. Then I got dressed because there was a lawyer to find and a record to build and no more nights to waste on the ceiling. The first hearing was 4 days later. I want you to understand how badly it went, because it matters. The reveal you are waiting for did not come first. The defeat came first, and it was total. I walked in wearing the only civilian clothes I had that were pressed, a plain blouse and slacks I had bought in an airport gift shop because everything I owned was either at sea, in storage, or behind a locked door. My deployment records were still somewhere in a mail system between a ship and a shore command. My bank statements were online behind a password Nathan had quietly changed in February. I had 4 hours of sleep in 7 months of body clock and a mind still convinced it was on the other side of the world. Nathan had a lawyer named Wade Coldwell. Silver hair, good suit, a gold watch, the easy manner of a man who has never once been surprised in a courtroom and does not expect to start today. He laid it out like a story he had told 100 times to 100 judges. Your Honor, this is a difficult case, Coldwell said, but a clear one. My client has been the stable, present parent throughout. The respondent has been deployed for the majority of these children's lives. She volunteered to extend this most recent deployment by 3 months. And there are, regrettably, documented concerns about her mental health that this court will need to weigh. He slid a folder to the clerk. Inside was a single page, 1 line highlighted in yellow, a counseling intake note from 2024, the word insomnia, the word adjustment, cropped so cleanly that you could not see what came after, could not see the page number, could not see that it was 1 page of 6. There is also, Coldwell went on, unhurried, a notarized agreement signed by the respondent authorizing my client to manage the household finances and the children's living arrangements during her absence. She signed away these decisions herself, Your Honor. We are simply asking the court to honor what she already agreed to. Nathan spoke then, for the first time, quiet and wounded, a man who had never wanted any of this. I didn't want to be here. I want to be clear about that. I just want the kids to have stability. She filed to extend the deployment. She chose the ship. I've been the only stable parent these children have known, and I'm asking the court to protect what they have. And from the second row, his mother, loud enough for the whole room to hear and be meant to hear. The Navy raised those babies, not her. That woman has missed birthdays, Christmases, first days of school. Ask her how many she's been there for. I stood up. I had no records, no lawyer, nothing but the truth, and no way yet to prove a word of it. I said the only thing I could say that I knew, in my bones, was true. I was ordered to see, I said. I did not choose to leave my children. The extension was directed by the Navy, not requested by me. I did not sign away my home, and I have never, one single day, been unfit to be their mother. It was not enough. Not yet. Truth without paper is just noise in a courtroom, and I knew it even as the words left my mouth. I could see it not landing. I could see the judge on that temporary docket, a different bench. A rushed 20 minutes weighing a folder against a feeling and choosing the folder. The court granted Nathan temporary primary custody. It granted me supervised visitation. 2 hours on Saturdays at a county family center, pending a full evidentiary hearing. Supervised, as if my children needed to be protected from me. I walked out with a visitation schedule for my own son and daughter folded in my hand. In the parking lot, my knees went, just for a second, and I put a hand on a cold car hood and made myself breathe the way you breathe when the compartment is filling and panic is a luxury you cannot afford. Then I stopped shaking, and I made a list. A real one this time. The first Saturday visit is the thing I still cannot talk about easily. A room with donated toys and a laminated schedule on the wall and a monitor with a clipboard, who was kind about it, which somehow made it worse. Milo would not look at me for the first 20 minutes. He sat with his back half turned and answered in one word at a time. Then, near the end, without warning, he climbed into my lap the way he had not done since he was 5, and he pressed his face into my shoulder, and he did not say anything at all. Hazel just kept asking when I was coming home. Over and over. When are you coming home, Mommy? And I could not answer her, because the honest answer was that I did not know, and I would not lie to her, so I held her, and I said soon, which was a lie, which I told anyway, because she was 6. When the 2 hours were up, the monitor said, gently, that it was time. I kissed them both. I walked to my car. I did not let go until the doors were closed and the engine was on. Then I let go, once, hard, for about 90 seconds, alone, and then I wiped my face, and I drove to a lawyer's office, because 90 seconds was all I could spare. On the way out that first Saturday, Nathan was waiting by the door of the family center, leaning on the wall with his hands in his pockets like a man with all the time in the world. He had come to pick the children up. He waited until I was close enough that he did not have to raise his voice. You could make this easy, he said. Sign the parenting plan. Take the weekends. Everybody moves on. You would still see them. You mean the plan with your name on the accounts, I said. He smiled a little sadly, the way he smiled at the judge. You're going to spend $20,000 on a lawyer and lose anyway, he said. You're never home, Gwen. Any judge can see that. You should think about the kids instead of your pride. I looked at him for a moment. He believed it. That was the thing that struck me. He had told the story so many times that he believed it now, believed that a woman ordered to see had abandoned her children, believed that carrying his debt for 9 years made me the dependent one. He had rewritten our whole marriage in his own favor and moved into the finished version. I am thinking about the kids, I said. That is exactly who I am thinking about. And I walked to my car and did not slam the door because a slammed door is a gift to a man who wants you to look unstable. The second Saturday, Milo brought me a drawing he had made at school. It was a gray ship on gray water with a stick figure standing on it, and underneath, in a 9-year-old's careful letters, he had written the word mom and then, smaller, the word home, with an arrow between them pointing the wrong way from the ship toward the shore. He did not explain it. He did not have to. I folded it into my bag like it was a classified document because to me it was. The interruption, when it came, was not a general at a door. There was no cavalry in this story. It was an office with bad carpet and a coffee maker that had given up and a lawyer named Margaret Yoon. I found her through Navy legal assistance. They gave me the referral and a first read on my rights. She gave me the war plan. Margaret was small and precise, and she read documents the way a gunner's mate reads a misfire, slowly, from a safe angle, assuming everything on the page is dangerous until proven otherwise. She had a legal pad, and she made a column down the left side and did not say much for the first 10 minutes. Then she read Nathan's notarized authorization twice. She set it down. She looked at me over her glasses. "This says you signed a withdrawal authorization and a parenting agreement on the 9th of March, she said. "Here, in this county, in front of a notary named on this seal." She tapped the date with one finger. "Commander, where were you on the 9th of March? 1,100 miles from the nearest notary," I said. "On a ship, in the middle of an operational communications stand-down. That week I could not have called home if the house were on fire. I certainly did not fly back, drive to a strip mall, and sign a form in front of a notary I have never met." Margaret smiled. It was a small smile, and it was the first time anyone had smiled at me since the jet bridge. "Then this is not a signature," she said. "It is a forgery with a stamp on it, and forgeries have authors." She wrote the word forgery at the top of her pad and underlined it. "Let's find yours." She put down the pen and she asked me what I wanted out of this. Not what I felt, what I wanted. I liked her for that. "I don't want a scene," I said. "I don't want to scream at him on a porch. I don't want to post his messages online and let strangers pick him apart. I don't want my children ever to watch their mother come apart in public. I want a record. I want the kind of proof you cannot cry your way out of." "Good," Margaret said. "Because I will tell you the truth about how this works. The counseling note and the sad husband act that plays. It plays to a rushed docket. It plays to a room full of relatives who have already made up their minds. It does not play to paper. Paper does not care how sad your husband looks. So we're going to bury them in paper. Get me your paper." "Here is how they win, if they win," Margaret said before I left, and she drew it on the pad so I would see it. "They keep the story simple, and they keep it about your absence. Deployed mother, present father, sad but stable. A judge on a crowded docket wants simple. Simple is fast. Our whole job is to make the simple story impossible to keep telling. Every document we put in front of the court makes their version a little harder to say with a straight face. We do not need a knockout. We need to make the truth cheaper to believe than the lie." She tapped each item on her list as she said it. The medical record beats the instability claim. The orders and the declaration beat the abandonment claim. The finances beat the nothing without me claim. And the notary beats the whole thing because a forged document does not just fail, it poisons everyone who touched it. "One thing I need from you," she said. "I need you to stop explaining yourself to me emotionally and start handing me evidence. I believe you. I do not need convincing. The judge does, and the judge only speaks paper. So every time you feel the urge to tell me how unfair this is, and it is unfair, write down a fact instead, a date, a dollar figure, a name. Turn the feeling into an exhibit. Can you do that?" "I have been doing that since the jet bridge," I said, and I showed her the boarding pass with the list on the back. And for the second time, she smiled. "I requested everything that afternoon. My complete medical record, all of it, not the page my husband had chosen. My last 3 fitness reports, my deployment orders, the involuntary extension message, the ship's communications log, and a declaration from my commanding officer, Captain Lewis Farrow, who had stood beside me on that bridge for 7.5 months and knew, to the day, what I had and had not been free to do." "One more thing," Margaret said as I stood to leave. "Do you have anyone, a neighbor, a friend, anyone who was near that house while you were gone? Cases like this turn on the person nobody thought to silence." I thought about it. "There's a woman down the street," I said. "Estelle. She watches everything. She always has." "Call her," Margaret said. For the first time since I had heard 9 seconds of my husband's voice on a jet bridge, I was not the one being written about. I was the one writing. The first thread I pulled was the note. The unstable note. The one that was supposed to make me dangerous. The one Coldwell had slid across the floor like a card he already knew would win the hand. Margaret subpoenaed the actual 2024 counseling record. Not the cropped screenshot. The whole file. When it came, it was 6 pages long, and it took her about 90 seconds to take the whole thing apart. It had been a voluntary series. 6 sessions. I had come home from a previous deployment sleeping badly, waking at 0300 out of pure habit, unable to shut my body off in a bed that no longer felt like it moved. I had gone to a Navy counselor on my own, before anyone ordered me to, before it was a problem for anyone but me, because that is what you are supposed to do, and what I tell my own sailors to do. 6 sessions of sleep hygiene and adjustment counseling. Closed out with a clean finding, fit for full duty, no diagnosis, no medication, no follow-up required. Nathan had photographed page 1, the intake page, where the counselor writes down the reason for the visit in the patient's own words. He had cropped it to a single line and highlighted it in yellow and handed it to a court as proof his wife was coming apart. Margaret held up page 6. He photographed page 1 and he hid page 6, she said. Page 6 clears you completely. Fit for full duty, no follow-up required, signed by the provider. She set it down flat on the desk between us. This is not evidence of instability, Commander. This is evidence that your husband went through your medical history hunting for a weapon, and the worst thing he could find was a woman who asked for help when she needed it and got better. I am going to enjoy handing the judge page 6. I sat with that for a moment. He had gone through my file, the most private thing I had ever done, walking into that counselor's office at 39 years old and admitting I was not sleeping, and he had saved it, cropped it, and turned it into an exhibit against me. That was the moment I stopped thinking of the marriage as something that had failed and started thinking of it as something that had been aimed. The second thread was the letters. Estelle Bird was 66 years old, 3 houses down, a widow who had watched my children get on the school bus every morning for years and never once asked me for a thing beyond a hand with a jar lid. She called me the second week I was back and asked me to come by. She had made coffee. She had a shoebox on the kitchen table with a rubber band around it. Inside were 11 letters. My letters. Every week on that deployment, I had written to Milo and Hazel, real letters, in an envelope, by hand, because I wanted them to have something they could hold on the days a video call could not reach the ship. 11 envelopes, everyone in my handwriting, everyone addressed to my own children at my own house. Every single one was marked, "Return to sender," in Nathan's handwriting. The mail carrier is my nephew, Estelle said. Danny? He didn't feel right about it, sending a Navy mother's letters back to a ship. The third time it happened, he brought them to me instead and asked me what to do. I've been keeping them for you in this box. She put her hand flat on the lid. I didn't know if I was doing right, Gwen. I didn't know what was happening in that house. I'm sorry it took me so long to say something. I wrote to my children every week from the middle of the ocean, and every week someone in that house took my words and my handwriting and sent them back unopened, so that my son and daughter would grow up a little more each week, believing their mother had gone quiet. That was the night something in me changed shape, not into rage. Rage I already had, and rage is useless. Rage is a fire with no oxygen discipline. It changed into resolve, which is colder and lasts longer. I stopped counting what they had taken from me. I started counting what I could prove. I took the shoebox home and I logged every envelope. Date, postmark, the exact words returned to sender. 11 exhibits. Estelle signed a short statement about her nephew and the box. I thanked her and she waved it off and told me to go get my babies, which I intended to do, on paper, the only way that would hold. The third thread was the one that cost me the most to pull because it meant asking my commanding officer to step into my divorce. You do not do that lightly. You spend your whole career keeping the two worlds apart, the ship and the house, and here I was, reaching across the line and asking one to save the other. I called Captain Farrow on a Wednesday evening. He had commanded the ship for the whole deployment. He was the kind of officer who never raised his voice because he never needed to. I told him what was happening, all of it, in as few words as I could manage, and there was a long pause on the line when I finished. Send me the request, he said finally. I will write a declaration tonight. Sir, I know this is not the kind of thing. Commander, he said, and he stopped me. You stood watches for me for 7.5 months. You ran damage control drills until the crew hated you and then loved you. I know exactly where you were on the 9th of March because you were on my bridge. A man is telling a court you abandoned your children while you were carrying out lawful orders I signed. I am not going to let that stand because it is awkward. He paused. Get me the dates you need confirmed. I will confirm every one of them. And Gwen, go win. I sat in the rented apartment after we hung up and I let myself breathe. Not everyone had turned away. The institution that actually knew me, the one my husband kept using as a weapon against me, was going to walk into that courtroom on paper and tell the truth. That is the difference between the ship and the house, in the end. The ship keeps records. The ship remembers where you were. The dig is where the numbers came in, and the numbers were the only thing in that whole story that never once dabbed their eyes on cue. Margaret brought in a forensic accountant named Nolan Frey. He was a quiet man with a laptop full of spreadsheets and a way of talking about money that made it sound like a confession being read aloud. He subpoenaed the accounts, all of them, the ones Nathan thought I could not see, and he walked me through what my husband had done while I was at sea. During the deployment, Frey said, your husband moved $41,000. He turned the laptop toward me so I could see the rows. $22,000 from the joint checking account in stages, never a single large transfer that would flag. $19,000 from the account labeled here as the Children's Education Fund. He scrolled. All of it into a new account he opened in February. The new account has a second name on it, Renee Ostroff. I looked at the number for a long time. $19,000. My son's college, my daughter's college, money I had set aside a little at a time from a paycheck I earned standing watches in the dark, moved dollar by careful dollar into an account with the name of the woman who had answered my door with my own mug in her hands. There is more, Frey said, almost gently, the way a good doctor tells you the rest of it. I went back further than the deployment. Your husband has been carrying about $31,000 of personal credit card debt for years. Quietly. 3 cards. It has been serviced month after month out of the joint account, which is to say, out of your Navy pay. He closed the laptop. Commander, I do a lot of these. I say this as a professional, not to make you feel better. He was not carrying you. You were carrying him. You have been carrying him financially for the better part of 9 years. He's nothing without me. That is what Nathan had told the court, and it turned out to be almost exactly true, only backwards, only pointed the wrong way. The man who stood up and said I could not build a single thing on my own had been standing. That entire marriage, on the foundation of my paycheck, in the house my CPay bought, spending money I earned in weather that tried to throw me off a bridge. The next piece was the deployment itself, the abandonment story. This was the one that made me angriest because it took the proudest thing about my life and tried to make it the crime. Captain Farrow sent a certified declaration. He wrote it in plain, hard Navy language. No adjectives. The way a good commanding officer writes when he knows every word may be read aloud. That the deployment had been directed, not requested. That the 7.5-month length included an involuntary extension of 90 days that I had no part in choosing and no power to decline. That during February and March, the ship had operated under a communications stand-down and that personal communications had been suspended by command authority, not by any choice of mine. The ship's morale communications log backed him up to the day, and my own phone told the rest of it. 211 attempted contacts across the deployment, calls that failed to connect, emails that bounced, every attempt time-stamped and sitting right there in my own device, a record of a woman trying over and over to reach a house that had already decided not to answer. Coldwell's office saw it coming. Good lawyers always feel the ground move before it moves. They filed a motion to seal the counseling record as irrelevant and prejudicial, which is a polished way of asking a court to look at page 1 forever and never once turn to page 6. Margaret filed her own motion to admit the entire record, all 6 pages, into evidence. Then Coldwell tried the other thing lawyers try when the paper starts to turn. He called Margaret with an offer. Nathan would generously agree to joint custody, and each side would keep the accounts currently in their names, and we would all move on quietly for the sake of the children. Margaret put it to me without any spin. It makes this end tomorrow, she said. You would see your kids half the time, you would eat the money he took, and there would be no finding on any record about who did what. No, I said. He gets to keep half of my children and all of the money he stole, and the file still says I might be unstable. No. We go to the hearing. That is what I hoped you would say, Margaret said. I just have to make sure you say it with your eyes open. That night Nathan called me, not to negotiate, to manage me the way he always had. I let it record. You're really going to do this, he said. Drag my mother into a courtroom. Drag our kids through this. For what, Gwen? For pride. For the $19,000 you took out of their college fund, I said. We can start there. I was managing our money while you were gone, he said. Somebody had to. You weren't here. He said it like he always said it. You weren't here. 3 words he had used for 9 years to end every argument, to explain every purchase, to justify every decision made without me. It had worked for 9 years because I had believed I owed him something for staying behind. I did not believe it anymore. I was ordered not to be here, I said. There is a difference, and a judge is going to hear it. He hung up. I saved the recording, and I sat in the quiet, and I finally let myself look at the marriage, straight on, the way you look at a casualty report, all at once, no flinching. The signs had been there for years. I just had been too far away, too often to read them in order. He had always called himself the provider in front of his mother at parties, though the mortgage came out of my account. He had slowly taken over the money, first the bills, then the passwords, then the decisions, always framed as a kindness, always so I would not have to worry from the ship. He had a way of telling stories about me to other people while I stood right there, small stories, funny at my expense, that taught the room how to see me. And every time I came home from a deployment, it took a few weeks to feel like a full person in my own house again, and I had always blamed the deployment for that, and never once blamed him. I did not blame myself for missing it. You cannot read a room you are 1,100 miles from. But I saw it now, laid out in dates and dollars and returned letters, and seeing it was the last thing I needed. A person who calls you nothing for long enough is not describing you. He is describing the version of you he needs in order to feel large. I had spent 9 years shrinking to fit that need. I was done shrinking. Every number lined up, every date, every dollar, and the more I stacked them, the calmer I got because I finally understood the shape of the whole thing. They had built their entire case on one belief, load-bearing, right at the center of it, the belief that no one would ever check a deployed woman's story, that I would come home too tired, too outnumbered, too ashamed, too alone to make anyone look. They had bet everything on nobody looking, and I had spent 20 years learning how to look. The proof cracked their story open the day before the reveal, in a quiet pre-hearing deposition that had no drama in it at all. That is where these things actually turn. Not with a shout in a courtroom, with one honest sentence pried out of a frightened person in a small room. The notary was the crack. The seal on Nathan's authorization belonged to a woman named in the record who worked out of an office 2 floors below Coldwell's, in the same downtown building. Margaret subpoenaed her notary journal, the log every notary in the state is required by law to keep, an entry for every document she stamps. There was no entry for the 9th of March, none at all, and her commission, it turned out, had lapsed the previous autumn. For months, she had been stamping documents with an authority she no longer legally held. Under questioning, she folded fast, the way people do when they have been dreading the question for months. She said she had never seen me sign anything in her life. She said Nathan had brought the pages to her already signed. He told me his wife was overseas and had authorized it by phone, she said, not looking at anyone. He said it was just a formality, to help with the kids while she was gone. He was very upset. I felt sorry for him. Margaret took her through it slowly, without any heat, which is the most dangerous way to question a frightened person. She did not accuse. She just asked, one small question at a time, and let each answer close a door. Did you watch Commander Halliday sign these pages? No. Was Commander Halliday in the room? No. Was Commander Halliday in the state? He said she was overseas. So the person whose signature you notarized was, by the signer's own account, on the far side of the world at the time. I suppose, yes. And your notary journal, the log you are required by law to keep, has no entry for this document on this date, or any date. No, there's no entry. And your commission had lapsed the previous October. A long pause. I didn't realize it had lapsed. You stamped a document you did not witness for a signer who was not present, with a seal you were no longer authorized to use, and you made no record of any of it. Margaret let that sit for a second. Is that a fair summary? The notary looked at the table. He told me it was a formality, she said, one more time, quietly, as if the word could still save her. You cannot notarize a phone call. A notary's entire job, the one thing the stamp is for, is to watch a living human being sign with their own hand. She knew that. She had known it when she inked the seal. She said it anyway, for a man who told her a sad story and called a forgery a formality. I did not hate her for it. She was one more person Nathan had found and used and left, holding the consequences, and there was a whole trail of them behind him now, and I was simply the last one who had decided to stop being used. That evening, Margaret laid out the choice, fairly, both ways. We had enough on paper to win, without me ever setting foot dramatically into that room. She could enter the certified records, the declaration, the finances, the notary's admission, all of it, as cold exhibits. Clean, bloodless, safe. Or you make a decision about how your children read this file in 15 years, she said. Because they will read it. Kids always find the file. I thought about that. I thought about Milo at 24 pulling a court record and finding a woman named Nothing, a woman accused of choosing a ship over him, a woman defending herself in an airport blouse. And I thought about the alternative. Put me in the record in uniform, I told her. Enter the finances and the declaration on the stand while I am standing there in my blues. If my children ever pull this file, I do not want them to find a woman defending herself. I want them to find exactly who their mother is. Margaret looked at me for a moment over her glasses, Then she nodded once. "All right, Commander," she said. "We do it your way." That night, I pressed my service dress blues myself in a rented apartment on an ironing board I had bought at a drugstore that afternoon. The dark coat, the gold buttons, the 3 rows of ribbons, and the top ribbon that I do not talk about much, and above them the gold surface warfare device, the pin I earned standing watches at 2 a.m. in seas that stood the ship on her rails, the pin nobody hands you. 20 years of my life fit on one left chest. I laid the coat out on the bed, and I stood there and looked at it for a while, and for the first time since the jet bridge, I was not afraid of the morning. I was almost impatient for it. Which brings us back to the Polish, and the paper, and my husband at the rail telling a courtroom that I was nothing. He finished the way he had rehearsed it. "She's nothing without me, Your Honor. She never built a thing on her own." Brenda dabbed one eye and then the other. Renee looked at her nails and did not look up. Judge Emmett Boyd took off his reading glasses. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He set the folder down, and he asked his question into the quiet, polished room. "Is anyone appearing on behalf of the respondent?" That is when the double doors opened. I walked in. I had come through a side entrance and waited in the hallway, and now I came up the center aisle in service dress blue, cover under my arm, ribbons on my chest, the gold device catching the courtroom light. My shoes were quiet on the polished floor. I did not rush. 20 years teaches you how to cross a deck like you have a right to be on it, and I crossed that floor like it was mine. Deputy Rowe stepped clear of the aisle, and without quite meaning to, straightened his back as I passed him. Judge Boyd looked at me for a long moment, at the coat, at the ribbons, at the gold pin above them, and then Emmett Boyd, who I would learn later had spent 6 years in the Navy himself before he ever went to law school, did the thing a judge almost never does for anyone. He stood up. He got to his feet behind the bench. The bailiff was already standing. Margaret rose beside my table. And then, in the way a room moves when it does not know why it is moving, but understands that it must, the rest of the courtroom got to its feet as well. Everyone. Everyone except Nathan, who sat frozen at the rail with his rehearsed grief dying on his face, and his mother, whose tissue had stopped halfway to her eye and stayed there. "Commander," Judge Boyd said, "take your time." For the first time in months, an entire room stood up for the right person. I took my seat beside Margaret. The judge sat. The room sat. The long, soft sound of everyone sitting was the only sound for a moment. Then the work began, and the work was quiet, and the work was merciless. Margaret entered the certified medical record, all 6 pages of it. She read page 6 aloud into the record, slowly, fit for full duty. No diagnosis, no concern, no follow-up required. Then she noted, for the record, in a voice with no anger in it at all, that opposing counsel's entire mental health exhibit had been a single cropped line lifted from page 1 of that same document. She entered the deployment orders and the involuntary extension message. She entered Captain Farrow's declaration, and she read the sentence about the communications stand down twice, slowly, so it would land and stay landed. That I had been forbidden by command authority from contacting home during the exact weeks the petition accused me of abandoning my family. She entered the log of 211 attempted contacts. Then she entered Estelle's 11 letters, in my own handwriting, marked return to sender and Nathan's, and she laid them out one at a time on the clerk's table. I watched Judge Boyd look at those envelopes for a long time, longer than he looked at anything else all day. Coldwell objected twice. Both times his voice had lost the easy music it had at the first hearing. He objected that the medical record was prejudicial, and the judge said mildly that it was opposing counsel who had first put the respondent's mental health in issue, with a single cropped page, and that the court intended to see the whole document now. He objected that Captain Farrow's declaration was hearsay, and Margaret pointed out that it was a certified official record with a proper foundation, and the judge admitted it. After the second time, Coldwell stopped objecting. There is a moment in a losing case when the lawyer stops fighting each exhibit and just lets it come, because every objection is only making the judge look harder at the thing he is objecting to. Coldwell reached that moment early, and he was too good to keep going past it. Then Margaret called Nolan Fry to the stand and had him walk the money in front of the room, live, one transfer at a time. The $22,000 from the joint account, the $19,000 from the education fund, the February date when the new account was opened with the second name on it, weeks before Nathan had ever mentioned the word divorce. and the $31,000 in old debt that my pay had been quietly carrying. In your professional opinion, Margaret asked, who was financially supporting whom in this marriage? The commander was supporting the household, Frey said. Entirely. The petitioner's income did not cover his own debt service, let alone the family's expenses. Without her pay, the household would have been insolvent within 2 months. Nathan looked at the table. He had told a judge I was nothing without him, and a man with a spreadsheet had just explained, in a flat professional voice, that the exact reverse was true, on the record, out loud, in a room where his own mother could hear it. She entered Frey's accounting. The $41,000, the $19,000 taken from the children's education fund, the $31,000 in hidden debt that my Navy pay had been quietly covering for 9 years. Frey said a sentence again for the record that financially the respondent had been carrying the petitioner, not the reverse. And she entered the citation. The Navy and Marine Corps medal. She read it short, the way you are supposed to read a citation, no embroidery. A machinery space fire aboard ship in the year 2016. A lieutenant who entered a compartment filling with smoke, without waiting to be told, and pulled 2 sailors clear before the space was sealed against the fire. The nation's highest decoration for heroism outside of combat. The room was very still while she read it. Nathan looked at the table. I want to tell you what that citation actually is, because the words in a citation are always small, and the thing they describe never is. 2016. A machinery space deep in the ship below the waterline. A fuel line failed and the space caught, and it filled with smoke faster than anyone could think, and 2 sailors were still inside. I was a lieutenant. I was the nearest officer. There was a procedure, and the procedure said to seal the space to starve the fire, and the procedure was correct, and following it would have killed 2 people I knew by name. I went in first. I did not decide to be brave. There was no time to decide anything. I found the first man by his boots and dragged him to the hatch, and I went back for the second one because leaving him was not a thing my body was willing to do, and we got the space sealed about 40 seconds after I came out of it the second time. Both of them lived. One of them has 3 kids now. He sends me a card every year at Christmas. That is the woman my husband told a courtroom was nothing. That is the woman he said had never built a single thing on her own. I built a way out of a burning compartment for 2 men with my own 2 hands, and then I came home, and a man in a gray suit tried to use the medal they gave me for it as evidence that I loved my ship more than my children. The court reporter, an older woman who had typed 10,000 ugly divorces, stopped typing for just a moment when Margaret finished reading the citation. Just a moment. Then she started again. But I saw it, and it steadied me more than anything the judge had said. Coldwell tried, once, on cross, to put me back in the box he had built. He asked me whether it was not true that I had been away for the majority of my children's lives. I have served my country at sea, I said. My children have never once gone without a parent who loved them, a home that was paid for, or a fund for their future. I made sure of all 3 from 1,100 miles away. The person who put those 3 things at risk is not the one who was deployed. He sat down after that. There was nowhere else to go. Then Judge Boyd did the last thing himself. He held up a single sheet of paper, a text message that Nathan's own side had produced in Discovery, and then, I think forgotten, was in the stack. A message from Nathan to Renee, dated in February, before any of this ever reached a courtroom. The judge read it aloud in a flat, careful, terrible voice. Once the court sees the note she's finished, the judge read, nobody checks a deployed woman's story. The courtroom did not gasp. It went silent, which is worse than a gasp. Renee had gone very pale. Brenda was looking at her son with an expression I had never seen on her face in 13 years and would rather not describe, because there was a kind of grief in it that was almost real. Margaret sat down. It was my turn to speak if I wanted it. I stood once, and I kept it short, because short is stronger. This was never about winning, I said. It was about the record being true. I served my country. I wrote to my children every week from the middle of the ocean. I did not sign that paper, and I am not, and I have never been. Nothing. I looked at the judge, not at Nathan, never at Nathan. That is all I wanted this court to know. I sat down. Judge Boyd ruled from the bench. He did not need to leave the room to think about it. Primary, physical, and legal custody of both children to me. The marital home restored to me alone. The $41,000 ordered returned in full, and the $31,000 of debt assigned to Nathan alone, cut away from any account of mine. The forged authorization declared void, and referred to the district attorney's office for review. The abandonment claim struck from the record in its entirety, and a finding entered permanently into the file that the respondent was a fit and capable parent whose military service had been deliberately used against her in bad faith. Nathan did not look at me. Not once. The whole time. He looked at the table in front of him, as if the table might offer him something to say. It did not. The table did not have an answer for him either. Here is the part people do not expect, and the part I am proudest of, though it looked like weakness from the outside. The district attorney's office reached out about the forgery. It is a felony. They had a clean case, the notary's own words, and a signature, dated to a day I was demonstrably at sea. And Margaret told me honestly that if I pushed, Nathan would very likely be charged, and it would not go well for him at all. I sat with that for a week. I let myself imagine it, because I am not a saint, and it was a satisfying thing to imagine. Then I called Margaret and told her to ask the office to consider a lesser resolution, restitution in full, a record of what he did, not a cell. You do not owe him that, Margaret said. I want you to hear me say it. After what he did, you owe that man nothing. I'm not doing it for him, I said. I am doing it for a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old who are going to grow up needing to say the word dad without it meaning a man in a prison. I do not need him ruined. I need him gone, and I need the kids safe, and I need the money back. That is a different math than revenge. I meant it. If it were only about me, I promise you my answer would be different. It is not only about me. It never was. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "That is the right answer, and I hate that it is the right answer." And she made the call. It was the only mercy in the whole story, and I want to be clear that it was not a gift to Nathan. It was a gift to Milo and Hazel, and it cost me something real to give, and I gave it anyway. Renee was gone within the month. People like that are always gone within the month, once the account is empty and the house is no longer up for grabs. Brenda sent a letter. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope before I opened it. It was half an apology and half a defense of her son, the way those letters always are. She was sorry things had gotten so ugly. But I had to understand, Nathan had been under so much pressure, and family was family, and surely the children still needed their grandmother in their lives. I answered at once, in writing, because I am done with rooms and porches. I told her the children could know her, on supervised, scheduled terms, at times I set and places I chose. I told her I did not doubt that she loved them, and I did not. That part was true. And I told her that the door was open exactly that far, and not 1 inch further. I did not slam the door. I have watched people spend years of their lives slamming doors, and all it ever does is give the other person something to stand outside and knock on. I simply did not leave it open for someone to walk back through and take more than they had already taken. There was no apology from Nathan. None ever came, none was offered, and in the end, none was asked for. We were finished, and finished turned out to be its own quiet kind of peace. Forgiveness, for me, was never going to be a warm hug on a porch and everyone crying and the music coming up. Forgiveness was refusing to carry them 1 single mile further. I had carried that marriage for 9 years without ever knowing the weight of it. In that courtroom, I finally set the weight down on the floor, and I walked away from it, and I did not pick it back up. A year later, I was screened for command. That is the Navy's way of saying they looked at all of it, the record and the fitness reports and the citation and the whole long arc of a career, and decided I was fit to command a ship of my own. The letter came on a Tuesday. I read it standing at my own kitchen counter, in my own house, in the early morning quiet before the kids were up, and then I set it down, and I made pancakes, because command can wait, and a 9-year-old's appetite cannot. Milo and Hazel were back in their own rooms, in their own beds, with the same nightlights and the same crooked posters. The education fund was whole again, every dollar of it returned and then some. On the wall in the hallway, I hung one framed photograph of the ship at sea, gray and low against a gray sky, and every single time I pass it, I remember exactly what it cost me and exactly what it was worth. One evening, Milo asked to see the medal. I keep it in a drawer, not on a shelf, because it is not a thing for showing. I took it out and I let him hold it once, in both hands, the way you hold something that is much heavier than it looks. "Were you a hero, Mom?" he asked, in that serious voice kids use when they already suspect the answer is complicated. "I was your mother," I said. "That was the harder job of the two. Both things are true." He thought about that the way 9-year-olds do, turning it over, and then he handed the medal back very carefully and asked what was for dinner, which is exactly the answer I wanted. That is what safe sounds like. It sounds like a child who has stopped worrying and started thinking about dinner, I think about the day I brought them home more than I think about the courtroom. The court order came through on a Thursday. I picked them up on a Friday from the family center for the last time, and there was no monitor and no clipboard and no laminated schedule on the wall. Just me and a car and 2 kids and their bags. Hazel asked in the back seat in her small, careful voice whether this was for real this time, whether she was going home, and I looked at her in the mirror and I said yes, for real, for good, and she nodded like she had suspected as much and went back to her book. Milo did not say anything for the whole drive, but when we turned onto our street and he saw the house, our house, he put his hand flat against the window, the way I had put my hand flat against a cold car hood in a parking lot months earlier, and he held it there until we pulled into the driveway. Then he said very quietly, "You came back. Not are you staying. Not is it real. Just, you came back, as if the coming back were the whole thing, as if that were the fact he had been holding on to." Every time, I said, that was never the part that was in doubt. I hung the ship's photograph in the hall that first weekend. The kids helped me level it. Estelle came for dinner. Robin flew out. We did not talk about Nathan or the case or any of it. We ate too much, and the children stayed up too late, and nobody watched a clock, and that, I have decided, is what winning actually looks like. It does not look like a room standing up. That was just the moment the truth got told. Winning looks like a Tuesday. Winning looks like pancakes and their own beds and a picture on the wall. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it is this. The cruelest thing in the world is not being hurt by a stranger. It is being called nothing by the one person who is supposed to know you best, and standing in a room while people believe him for a while. When that happens to you, and for some of you it already has, do not spend yourself on rage. Rage is loud, and it convinces no one, and it burns the one holding it. Build the record instead. Gather the paper, keep the letters. Let the truth stand up in its own uniform and cross the room on its own 2 feet. It will get there. It got there for me, and I promise you, it can get there for you. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Someone who is being told they are nothing by a person who should know better. Leave a comment and tell me about a time you were underestimated and prove them wrong anyway. I read them, all of them. And if you want more stories about courage, justice, and hope, about ordinary people who were counted out and stood up anyway, subscribe and stay with me a while. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. It means more than you know. The end.